Hello, and welcome to Storytime with Alaric. It is about 6:31. I am exceptionally tired today. I have no idea if anyone has plans on joining us, but hopefully, if they do, the screen capture will work properly and you'll be able to hear them. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Good evening.
Yes, good evening. How goes it?
Just fine. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Yeah.
Yeah. I have my tea and I have the book, and somebody actually decided to join in real time today. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I might have to head out
Right.
um at some period, but
Absolutely. I figure whomever would like to pop in and pop out is totally fine, and it will be up for whomever wants to listen to it. So,
will.
welcome. It's been a while since I've heard from you.
Yeah, I've missed a fair few of the meetups.
Yeah, I have as well. So, did you wind up listening to the first bit?
I did.
Nice.
I haven't read the book before, so
Yeah,
it's good fun.
it's one not a lot of folks have heard of before. So,
Yeah, like my sole experience with Hyperion is that's the name of one of the gun companies in Borderlands.
yes, that is a thing. I believe it is also a Greek or Roman god or character of myth. Um, I don't remember what exactly it is. Some of the later books are called Endymion, which I know is from Greek and Roman mythology. But it's a weird little book, and it's one of my favorites. So I figured I would share it for whomever wanted to uh, listen.
Yeah, like the first bit.
Yeah, I figure, something I can contribute and make people's lives better and give myself something to do as well. So, um, we are reading The Priest's Tale today, The Man Who Cried God. Sometimes there is a thin line separating orthodox zeal from apostate. Sometimes words get me, even though I read a lot, said Father Lenar Holt. So began the priest's story. Later, dictating the tale into his comlog, the council remembered it as a seamless whole, minus the pauses, hoarse voice, false starts, and small redundancies, which were the timeless failings of human speech. Lenar Hoyt had been a young priest, born, raised, and only recently ordained into the Catholic world of Passem, when he was given his first off-world assignment. He was ordered to escort the respected Jesuit Father Paul Durer into a quiet exile on the colony world of Hyperion. In another time, Father Paul Durer certainly would have become a bishop and perhaps a pope. Tall, thin, ascetic, with white hair receding from a noble brow and eyes too filled with the sharp edge of experience tied their pain, Paul Durer was a follower of St. Teilhard, as well as an archaeologist, ethnologist, an eminent Jesuit theologian. Despite the decline of the Catholic Church into what amounted to a half-forgotten cult tolerance because of its quietness and isolation from the mainstream of hegemony life, Jesuit logic had not lost its bite. Nor had Father Durer lost his conviction that the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church continued to be humankind's last, best hope for immortality. To Leonard Hoyt as a boy, Father Durer had been a somewhat godlike figure when glimpsed during his rare visits to the pre-seminary schools, or on the would-be seminarians' ever rarer visits to the New Vatican. Then, during the years of Hoyt's study in seminary, Durer had been on an important church-sponsored archaeological dig to the nearby world of Armagast. When the Jesuit returned a few weeks after Hoyt's ordination, it had been under a cloud. No one outside the highest circles of the New Vatican knew precisely what had happened, but there were whispers of excommunication and even of a hearing before the Holy Office of the Inquisition, dormant since the 4 centuries, since the confusion following the death of Earth. Instead, Father Durer had asked for a posting to Hyperion, a world most people knew of only because of the bizarre Shrike cult which had originated there, and Father Hoyt had been chosen to accompany him. It would be a thankless job, traveling in a role which combined the worst aspects of apprentice, escort, and spy, without even the satisfaction of seeing a new world. Hoyt was under orders to see Father Durer down to the Hyperion spaceport and then reboard the same spin ship for its returning voyage to the world web. With that, Bisso Price was offering what the Bisso Price was offering Leonard Hoyt was 20 months in cryogenic fugue, a few weeks of in-system travel at either end of the voyage, and a time debt which would return him to pass him 8 years behind his former classmates in the quest for Vatican careers and missionary postings. Bound by obedience and schooled in discipline, Leonard Hoyt had accepted without question. Their transport, the aging spinship H.S. Nadia Olga, was a pockmarked metal tube with no artificial gravity of any sort when it was not under drive, no viewports for the passengers, and no onboard recreation except for the stim sims piped into the data link to keep passengers in their hammocks and fugue couches. After awakening from fugue, the passengers, mostly off-world workers and economy-rate tourists, with a few cult mystics and would-be Shrike suicides thrown in for good measure, slept in those same hammocks and fugue couches, ate recycled food in featureless metal decks, and generally tried to cope with space sickness and boredom during their 12-day zero-G glide from their spin-out point to Hyperion. Father Hoyt learned little from Father Durer during those days of forced intimacy, nothing at all about the events on Armagast, which had sent the senior priest into exile. The younger man had keyed his comlog implant to seek out as much data as it could on Hyperion, and by the time they were 3 days out from planetfall, Father Hoyt considered himself somewhat of an expert on the world. There are records of Catholics coming to Hyperion, but no mention of a diocese there, said Hoyt one evening as they hung talking in their zero-G hammocks, while most of their fellow passengers lay tuned into erotic stim sims. I presume you're going to go down to do some mission work. Not at all, replied Father Durer. The good people of Hyperion have done nothing to foist their religious opinions on me, so I see no reason to offend them with my proselytizing. Actually, I hope to travel to this other continent, Aquilia, and then find a way inland from the city of Port Romance, but not in the guise of a missionary. I plan to set up an ethnological research station along the cleft. Research? Father Hoyt had echoed in surprise. He closed his eyes to key his implant. Looking again at Father Durer, he said, That section of the Pinion Plateau isn't inhabited, Father. The flame forests make it totally inaccessible most of the year. Father Durer smiled and nodded. He carried no implant, and his ancient comlad log had been in his luggage for the duration of the trip. Not quite inaccessible, he said softly, and not quite uninhabited. The Bikura lived there. Bikura, Father Hoyt said, closing his eyes. But they're just a legend, he said at last. Said Father Durer. Try cross-indexing through Mehmet Speedling. Father Hoyt closed his eyes again. General Index told him that Mehmet Speedling had been a minor explorer affiliated with the Shackleton Institute on Renaissance Minor, who, almost a standard century and a half earlier, had filed a short report with the Institute in which he told of hacking his way inland from the then newly settled Port Romance, through swamplands which had since been reclaimed for fiberplastic plantations, passing through the flame forests during a period of rare quietude, and climbing high enough on the Pinion Plateau to encounter the Cleft and a small tribe of humans who fit the profile of the legendary Bikura. Speedling's brief notes hypothesized that the humans were survivors of a missing seed ship colony from 3 centuries earlier, and clearly described a group suffering all of the classic retrograde cultural effects of extreme isolation, inbreeding, and over-adaptation. In Speedling's blunt words, even after less than 2 days here, it is obvious that the Bikura are too stupid, lethargic, and dull to waste time describing. As it turned out, the flame forests had begun to show some signs of becoming active, and Speedling had not wasted any more time observing his discovery, but had rushed to reach the coast, losing 4 indigene bearers, all of his equipment and records, and his left arm to the quiet forest in the 3 months it took him to escape. My God, Father Hoyt had said, as he lay in his hammock on the Nadia Olga. Why the Bikura? Why not? Had been Father Durer's mild reply. Very little is known about them. Very little is known about most of Hyperion, said the younger priest, becoming somewhat agitated. What about the time tombs and the legendary Shrike north of the Brindle Ridge and Equus? He said. They're famous. Precisely, said Father Durer. Leonard, how many learned papers have been written on the tombs and the Shrike creature? Hundreds? Thousands? The aging priest had tamped in tobacco and now lighted his pipe. No small feat in zero-G, Hoyt observed. Besides, said Paul Dear, even if the Shrike thing is real, it is not human. I am partial to human beings. Yes, said Hoyt, ransacking his mental arsenal for potential arguments, but the Bikura are such a small mystery. At the most, you're going to find a few dozen indigenes living in a region so cloudy and smoky and unimportant that even the colony's own map sets haven't noticed them. Why choose them when there are big mysteries to study on Hyperion, like the labyrinths? Hoyt had brightened. Did you know that Hyperion is one of the 9 labyrinthian worlds, Father? Of course, said Deary. A rough hemisphere of smoke expanded from him until the air currents broke it into tendrils and tributaries. But the labyrinths have their researchers and admirers throughout the web, Leonard, and the tunnels have been there on all 9 worlds for how long? 500,000 standard years? Closer to 750,000, I believe. Their secret will last. But how long will the Bikura culture last before they're absorbed into modern colonial society, or, more likely, are simply wiped out by circumstances? Hoyt shrugged. Perhaps they're already gone. It's been a long time since Speedling's encounter with them, and there hasn't been any other confirmed reports. If they are extinct as a group, then all of your time, debt, and labor and pain of getting there will be for nothing. Precisely, was all that Father Paul Durer had said, and puffed calmly on his pipe. It was in their last hour together, during the dropship ride down, that Father Hoyt had gained the slightest glimpse into his companion's thoughts. The limb of Hyperion had been glowing white and green and lapis above them for hours when suddenly the old dropship had cut into the upper layers of atmosphere. Flame had briefly filled the windows, and then they were flying silently some 60 kilometers above dark cloud masses and starlit seas, with the hurtling terminator of Hyperion's sunrise rushing towards them like a spectral tide wave of light. Marvelous, Paul Durer had whispered, more to himself than to his young companion. Marvelous. It is at times like this that I have the slightest sense, of what a sacrifice it must have been for the Son of God to condescend to become the Son of Man. Hoyt had wanted to talk then, but Father Durer had continued to stare out the window, lost in thought. 10 minutes later they had landed in Keats Interstellar. Father Durer was soon swept into the whirlpool of customs and luggage rituals, and 20 minutes after that, a thoroughly disappointed Leonard Holt was rising toward space in the Nadia Olga once again. 5 weeks later, of my time, I returned to Passam, said Father Hoyt. I had mislaid 8 years, but for some reason my sense of loss ran deeper than that simple fact. Immediately upon my return, the bishop informed me that there had been no word from Paul Durer during the 4 years of his stay on Hyperion. The new Vatican had spent a fortune on fat-line inquiries, but neither the colonial authorities nor the consulate in Keats had been able to locate the missing priest. Hoyt paused to sip from his water glass, and the counsel said, I remember the search. I never met Durer, of course, but we did our best to trace him. Theo, my aide, spent a lot of energy over the years trying to solve the case of the missing cleric. Other than a few contradictory reports of sightings in Port Romance, there was no trace of him, and those sightings went back to the weeks right after his arrival, years before. There were hundreds of plantations out there with no radios or comm lines, primarily because they were harvesting bootleg drugs as well as fiber plastics. I guess we never talked to the people at the right plantation. At least I know Father Durer's file was still open when I left. Father Hoyt nodded. I landed in Keats a month after your replacement had taken over at the consulate. The bishop had been astonished when I volunteered to return. His Holiness himself granted me an audience. I was on Hyperion less than 7 of its local months. By the time I left to return to the web, I had discovered the fate of Father Durer. Hoyt tapped the 2 stained leather books on the table. If I am to complete this, he said, his voice thick, I must read excerpts from this. The tree ship Yggdrasil had turned so the bulk of the tree had blocked the sun. The effect was to plunge the dining platform and the curved canopy of leaves beneath it into night, but instead of a few thousand stars dotting the sky, as would have been the case from the planet's surface, literally 1,000,000 suns blazed above, beside, and beneath the group at the table. Hyperion was a distinct sphere now, hurtling directly at them like some deadly missile. Read, said Martin Silenus. From the Journal of Father Paul Durer. Day 1. So begins my exile. I am somewhat at a loss as to how to date my new journal. By the monastic calendar on Passam, it is the 17th day of Thomas month in the year of our Lord, 2732. By Hegemony Standard, it is October 12th, 589 PC. By Hyperion reckoning, or so I am told by the weazened little clerk in the old hotel where I am staying, it is the 23rd day of Lysis, the last of their 7 40-day months. Either 428 ADC, after dropship crash, or the 128th year of the reign of Sad King Billy, who has not reigned for at least 100 of those years. To hell with it. I'll call it day 1 of my exile. Exhausting day. Strange to be tired after months of sleep, but that is said to be a common reaction after awakening from fugue. My cells feel fatigued of these past months' travel, even if I do not remember them. I don't remember feeling this tired from travel when I was younger. I felt bad about not getting to know young Hoyt better. He seems a decent sort, all proper catechisms and bright eyes. It's no fault of the youngsters like him that the church is in its final days. It's just that his brand of happy naivete can do nothing to arrest the slide into oblivion, which the church seems destined for. Well, my contributions have not helped either. Brilliant view of my new world as the dropship brought us down. I was able to make out 2 of the 3 continents, Equus and Aquila. The third one, Ursa, was not visible. Planetfall at Keats, and hours of efforts getting through customs and taking ground transit into the city. Confused images. The mountain range to the north with its shifting blue haze, foothills forested with orange and yellow trees, pale sky with its green-blue undercoating, the sun too small but more brilliant than Passam's. Colors seem more vivid from a distance, dissolving and scattering as one approaches, like a pointillist's palette. The great sculpture of Sad King Billy, which I have heard so much about, was oddly disappointing. Seen from the highway, it looked raw and rough, a hasty sketch, chiseled from the dark mountain, rather than the regal figure I had expected. It does brood over this ramshackle city of 500,000 people in a way that the neurotic poet king probably would have appreciated. Yeah. Okay. Pardon the interruption. The town itself seems to be separated into the sprawling maze of slums and saloons, which the locals call Jacktown, and Keats itself, this so-called old city, although it dates back only 4 centuries. All polished stone and studied sterility. I will take the tour soon. I had scheduled a month in Keats, but already I am eager to press on. Oh, Monsignor Edouard, if you could see me now, punished but still unrepentant, more alone than ever but strangely satisfied with my new exile. If my punishment for past excesses brought about by my zeal is to be banishment to the 7th circle of desolation, then Hyperion was well chosen. I could forget my self-appointed mission to the distant Bicura. Are they real? I think not this night, and content myself with living out the remainder of my years in this provincial capital on this god-forsaken backwater world. My exile would be no less complete. Ah, Eduardo, boys together, classmates together, although I was not so brilliant nor so orthodox as you, now old men together. But now you are 4 years wiser, and I am still the mischievous, unrepentant boy you remember. I pray that you are alive and well and praying for me. Tired. Will sleep. Tomorrow, take the tour of Keats, eat well, and arrange transport to Aquila and point south. Day 5. There is a cathedral in Keats, or rather, there was one. It has been abandoned for at least 2 standard centuries. It lies in ruins with its transept open to the green-blue skies, one of its western towers unfinished, and the other tower a skeletal framework of tumbled stones and rusted reinforcement rods. I stumbled upon it while wandering, lost, along the banks of the Hooghly River in the sparsely populated section of town where the old city decays into Jacktown, amid a jumble of tall warehouses which prevent even a glimpse of the ruined towers of the cathedral, until one turns a corner onto a narrow cul-de-sac, and there is a shell of a cathedral. Its chapter house has half fallen away into the river. Its facade is pocketed with the remnants of the mournful apocalyptic statuary of the post-Tigra expansionist period. I wandered through the latticework of shadows and fallen blocks onto the nave. The bishopric on Passam has not mentioned any history of Catholicism on Hyperion, much less the presence of a cathedral. It is almost inconceivable that the scattered seedship colonies of only 4 centuries ago could have supported a large enough congregation to warrant the presence of a bishop, much less a cathedral, yet there it was. I poked through the shadows of the scarcity. Sacristy? Some of these words I'm just like, I've never heard of them before, even though I've read this book like 3 times. Dust and powdered plaster hung in the air like incense, outlining 2 shafts of sunlight, streaming down from narrow windows high above. I stepped out onto a broader patch of sunlight and approached an altar stripped of all decoration except for chips and cracks caused by falling masonry. The great cross, which had hung on the east wall behind the altar, had also fallen and now lay in ceramic splinters among the heap of stones there. Without conscious thought, I stepped behind the altar, raised my arms, and began the celebration of the Eucharist. Eucharist? Yeah, I'm not Catholic. There was no sense of parody or melodrama in this act, no symbolism or hidden intention. It was merely the automatic reaction of a priest who had said Mass almost daily for more than 46 years of his life, and who now faced the prospect of never again participating in the reassuring ritual of that celebration. It was with some shock that I realized I had a congregation. The old woman was kneeling in the fourth row of pews. The black of her dress and scarf blended so perfectly with the shadows that there was only the pale oval of her face that was visible, lined and ancient, floating disembodied in the darkness. Startled, I stopped speaking the litany of consecration. She was looking at me, but something about her eyes, even at a distance, instantly convinced me that she was blind. For a moment I could not speak, and stood there mute, squinting in the dusty light bathing the altar, trying to explain this spectral image to myself, while at the same time attempting to frame an explanation of my own presence and actions. When I did find my voice and call to her, the words echoing in the great hall, I realized that she had moved. I could hear her feet scraping on the stone floor. There was a rasping sound, and then a brief flare of light illuminated her profile far to the right of the altar. I shielded my eyes from the shafts of sunlight, and began picking my way over the detritus where the altar railing had once stood. I called to her again, offered reassurances, and told her not to be afraid, even though it was I who had chills coursing up my back. I moved quickly, but when I reached the sheltered corner of the nave she was gone. A small door led to the crumbling chapter house in the river bank. There was no sight of her. I returned to the dark interior and would have gladly attributed her appearance to my imagination, a waking dream after so many months of enforced cryogenic dreamlessness, but for a single tangible proof of her presence. There, in the cool darkness, burned a lone red votive candle, its tiny flame flickering to unseen drafts and currents. I am tired of this city. I am tired of its pagan pretensions and false histories. Hyperion is a poet's world devoid of poetry. Keats itself is a mixture of tawdry false classism and mindless boomtown energy. There are 3 Zen-gonastic assemblies and 4 high Muslim mosques in this town, but the real houses of worship are the countless saloons and brothels, the huge marketplaces handling the fiberplastic shipments from the south, and the Shrike cult temples where lost souls hide their suicidal hopelessness behind a shield of shallow mysticism. The whole planet reeks of mysticism without relevation. To hell with it. Tomorrow I head south. There are skimmers and other aircraft on this absurd world, but for the common folk, travel between these accursed island continents seems restricted to boat, which takes forever, I am told, or one of those huge passenger dirigibles which departs from Keats only once a week. I leave early tomorrow by dirigible. Day 10. Animals. The first down team for this planet must have a fixation on animals. Horse, bear, eagle. For 3 days we were creeping down the east coast of Equus over an irregular coastline called the Main. We've spent the last day making the crossings of a short span of middle sea to a large island called Cat Key. Today we are offloading passengers and freight at Felix, the major city of the island. From what I can see from the observation promenade and the mooring tower, there can't be more than 5,000 people living in that random collection of hovels and barracks. Next, the ship will make its 800-kilometer climb down a series of smaller islands called the Nine Tails, and then take a bold leap across 700 kilometers of open sea and the equator. The next land we see, then, is the northwest coast of Aquila, the so-called Beak. Animals. To call this conveyance passenger dirigible is an exercise in creative semantics. It is a huge lifting device with cargo hold large enough to carry the town of Felix out to sea and still have room for thousands of bales of fiberplastic. Meanwhile, the less important cargo, we passengers, make do where we can. I have set up a cot near the aft holding portal and made a rather comfortable niche for myself with my personal luggage and 3 large trunks of expedition gear. Near me is a family of 8 indigene plantation workers returning from a biannual shopping expedition of their own to Keats. And although I do not mind the sound or scent of their caged pigs or the squeal of their food hamsters, the incessant, confused crowing of their poor, befuddled rooster is more than I can stand some nights. Animals. Day 11. Dinner tonight in the saloon above the promenade deck with citizen Hermes Denzel, a retired professor from a small planters' college near Endymion. He informed me that the Hyperion first down team had no animal fetish after all. The official names of the 3 continents are not Iquus, Ursa, and Aquila, but Craigton, Allison, and Lopez. He went on to say that this was in honor of 3 middling-level bureaucrats in the old survey service. Better, The animal fetish. Are you off? Yeah. All right.
Oh, yeah, I am.
I will see you later.
Hasta la bye-bye.
Hasta la bye-bye. It is after dinner. I am alone on the outside promenade to watch the sunset. The walkway here is sheltered by the forward cargo module, so that the wind is little more than a salt-tinged breeze. Above me curves the orange and green skins of the dirigible. We are between islands. The sea is a rich lapis shot through with verdant undertones, a reversal of sky tones. The scattering of high Curious catches the last light of Hyperion's too small sun. It ignites like burning coral. There is no sound except for the faintest hum of the electrical turbines. 300 meters below, the shadow of a huge, manta-like undersea creature keeps pace with the dirigible. A second ago, an insect or bird the size and color of a hummingbird, but with gossamer wings, a meter across, paused 5 meters out to inspect me, before diving toward the sea with folded wings. Edouard, I feel very alone tonight. It would help if I knew you were alive. Still working in the gardens, writing evenings in your study. I thought my travels would stir my beliefs in St. Telhard's concept of God, in whom the Christ of evolution, the personal, the universal, the en hot, and the en avant are joined, but no such renewal is forthcoming. It is growing dark. I am growing old. I feel something, not yet remorse, at my sin of falsifying the evidence on the Armagast dig. But Edouard, your excellency, if the artifacts had indicated the presence of a Christ-oriented culture there, 600 light years from old Earth, almost 3,000 years before man left the surface of the homeworld, was it so dark a sin to interpret such ambiguous data in a way which could have meant the resurgence of Christianity in our lifetime? Yes, it was, but not, I think, because of the sin of tampering with the data, but the deeper sin of thinking that Christianity could be saved. The Church is dying, Edouard, and not merely our beloved branch of the Holy Tree, but all of its offshoots, vestiges, and cankers. The entire body of Christ is dying as surely as this poorly used body of mine, Edouard. You and I knew this in Armagast, where the blood sun illuminated only dust and death. We knew it that cool, green summer at the college when we first took our vows. We knew it as boys in the quiet playfields of the Villefranche-sur-Saône. We know it now. The light is gone now. I must write by the slight glow from the salon windows to the deck above. The stars lie in strange constellations. The middle sea glows at night with a greenish, unhealthy phosphorescence. There is a dark mass on the horizon to the southeast. It may be a storm, or it may be the next island in the chain, the third of the 9 tails. What mythology deals with a cat with 9 tails? I know of none. For the sake of the bird I saw earlier, if it was a bird, I pray that it is an island ahead and not a storm. Day 28. I have been in Port Romance 8 days, and I have seen 3 dead men. The first was a beached corpse, a bloated white parody of a man that had washed up on the mud flats beyond the mooring tower my first evening in town. Children threw stones at it. The second man I watched being pulled from the burned wreckage of a methane unit shop in the poor section of town near my hotel. His body was charred beyond recognition and shrunken by the heat, his arms and legs pulled tight in the prizefighter posture burning victims have been reduced to since time immemorial. I have been fasting all day, and I confess with shame that I began to salivate when the air filled with a rich, frying fat odor of burned flesh. The third man was murdered not 3 meters from me. I had just emerged from the hotel onto the maze of mud-spattered planks that serve as a sidewalk in this miserable town, when shots rang out and a man several paces ahead of me lurched as if his foot had slipped, spun toward me with a quizzical look on his face, and fell sideways into the mud and sewage. He had been shot 3 times with some sort of projectile weapon. 2 of the bullets had struck his chest. The third entered just below the left eye. Incredibly, he was still breathing when I reached him. Without thinking about it, I removed my stole from my carrying bag, fumbled for the vial of holy water I had carried for so long, and proceeded to perform the sacrament of extreme unction. No one in the gathering crowd objected. The fallen man stirred once, cleared his throat as if he were about to speak, and died. The crowd dispersed even before the body was removed. The man was middle-aged, sandy-haired, and slightly overweight. He carried no identification, not even a universal card or comlog. There were 6 silver coins in his pocket. For some reason, I elected to stay with the body the rest of that day. The doctor was a short and cynical man who allowed me to stay during the required autopsy. I suspected that he was starved for conversation. "This is what the whole thing's worth," he said, as he opened the poor man's belly like a pink satchel, pulling the folds of skin and muscle back and pinning them down like tent flaps. "What thing?" I asked. "His life," said the doctor, and pulled the skin of the corpse's face up and back like a greasy mask. "Your life, my life." The red and white stripes of overlapping muscle turned to blue bruise around the ragged hole, just above the cheekbone. "There has to be more than this," I said. The doctor looked up from his grim work with a bemused smile. "Is there?" he said. "Please show me." He lifted the man's heart and seemed to weigh it in one hand. In the web worlds, this would be worth some money on the open market. There are those too poor to keep vat-grown clone parts on store, but too well off to die just for the want of a heart. But out here, it's just awful. "There has to be more," I said, although I felt little conviction. I remembered the funeral of His Holiness Pope Urban XV, shortly before I left Passam. As had been the custom since pre-Hegra days, the corpse was not embalmed. It waited in the anteroom off the main bacilla to be fitted for the plain wooden coffin. As I helped Edouard and Monsignor Frey place the vestments on the stiffened corpse, I noticed the browning skin and slackened mouth. The doctor shrugged and finished performing the perfunctory autopsy. There was the briefest of formal inquiries. No suspect was found, no motive put forward. A description of the murdered man was sent to Keats, but the man himself was buried the next day in a pauper's field between the mud flats and the yellow jungle. Port Romance is a jumble of yellow weirwood structures set on a maze of scaffolds and planks stretching far out onto the tidal mud flats at the mouth of the Cans. The river is almost 2 kilometers wide here, where it spills out into Toshidada High Bay, but only a few channels are navigable, and the dredging goes on day and night. I lie awake each night in my cheap room with the window open to the pounding of the dredge hammer sounding like the booming of this vile city's heart. The distant susurration of the surf, its wet breath, say that over. The distant susurration of the surf, its wet breathing. Tonight, I listen to the city breathe, and cannot help but give it the flayed face of the murdered man. The companies keep a skimmer port on the edge of town to ferry men and material inland to the larger plantations, but I do not have enough money to bribe my way aboard. Rather, I could get myself aboard, but cannot afford to transport my 3 trunks of medical and scientific gear. I am still tempted. My service among the Baikura seems more absurd and irrational now than ever before. Only my strange need for a destination and a certain masochistic determination to complete the terms of my self-imposed exile keep me moving upriver. There is a river boat departing up the Cans in 2 days. I have booked passage and will move my trunks onto it tomorrow. It will not be hard to leave Port Romance behind. Day 41. The Emporiatic Girandole continues its slow progress upriver. No sight of human habitation since we left Melton's Landing 2 days ago. The jungle presses down onto the riverbank like a solid wall now. Excuse me. More, it almost completely overhangs us in places where the river narrows to 30 or 40 meters. The light itself is yellow, rich as liquid butter, filtered as though through foliage and fronds, meters above the brown surface of the Cans. I sit on the rusted tin roof of the center passenger barge and strain to make out my first glimpse of a Tesla tree. Old Caddy, sitting nearby, pauses in his whittling, spits over the side through the gap in his teeth, and laughs at me. "Ain't going to be no flame trees this far down," he says. "If they was, this forest sure as hell wouldn't look like this. You gotta get up into the pinions before you see a Tesla. We ain't out of the rainforest yet, Padre." It rains every afternoon. Actually, rain is too gentle a term for the deluge that strikes us each day, obscuring the shore and slowing our obscuring the shore, pounding the tin roofs of the barges with a deafening roar, and slowing our upstream crawl until it seems we are standing still. It is as if the river becomes a vertical torrent each afternoon, a waterfall which the ship must climb if we are to go on. The Girandole is an ancient, flat-bottomed tow with 5 barges lashed around it like ragged children, clinging to their tired mother's skirts. 3 of the 2 level barges carry bales of goods to be traded and sold up at the few plantations and settlements along the river. The other two offer a simulacrum of lodging for the indigenes traveling upriver, although I suspect that some of the barge's residents are permanent. My own berth boasts a stained mattress on the floor and lizard-like insects on the walls. After the rains, everyone gathers on the decks to watch the evening mists rise from the cooling river. The air is very hot and supersaturated with moisture most of the day now. Old Caddy tells me that I have come too late to make the climb through the rain and flame forests before the Tesla trees become active. We shall see. Tonight, the mists rise like the spirits of the dead, of all the dead who sleep beneath the river's dark surface. The last tattered remnants of the afternoon's cloud cover dissipate through the tree tops, and color returns to the world. I watch as the dense forest shifts from chrome yellow to a translucent saffron and then slowly fades through ochre to umber to gloom. Aboard the girandole, Old Caddy lights the lanterns and candle globes hanging from the sagging second tier, and as if not to be outdone, the darkened jungle begins to glow with the faint phosphorescence of decay, while glowbirds and multi-hued gossamers can be seen floating from branch to branch in the darker upper regions. Hyperion's small moon is not visible tonight, but this world moves through more debris than is common for a planet so close to its sun, and the night skies are illuminated by frequent meteor showers. Tonight, the heavens are especially fertile, and we move into wide sections of the river. We can see a tracery of brilliant meteor trails weaving the stars together. Their images burn the retina after a while, and I look down at the river only to see the same optic echo there in the dark waters. There's a bright glow on the eastern horizon, and Old Caddy tells me that this is from the orbital mirrors which give light to a few of the larger plantations. It is too warm to return to my cabin. I spread my thin mat on the rooftop of my barge and watch the celestial light show while clusters of indigene families sing haunting songs in an argot I have not even tried to learn. I wonder about the Baikura, still far away from here, and a strange anxiety rises in me. Somewhere in the forest, an animal screams with the voice of a frightened woman. Day 60. Arrived Placebo Plantation. Sick. Day 62. Very ill. Fever. Fits of shaking. All yesterday I was vomiting black bile. The rain is deafening. At nights the clouds are lit from above by orbital mirrors. The sky seems to be on fire. My fever is very high. A woman takes care of me. Bathes me. Too sick to be ashamed. Her hair is darker than most indigenes. She says little, dark, gentle eyes. Oh God, to be sick so far from home. Day. She is waiting, spying, comes in from the rain, the thin shirt. On purpose to tempt me, knows what I am, my skin burning on fire, thin cotton nipples dark against it. I know who they are. They are watching, hear their voices at night. They bathe me in poison, burns me. They think I don't know, but I hear the voices above the rain when the screaming stop, stop, stop. My skin is almost gone. Red underneath, I can feel the hole in my cheek. When I find the bullet, I will spit it out. As Mr. Nobis Mears or Nobis Misery. Day 65. Thank you, dear Lord, for deliverance from illness. Day 66. Shaved today. Was able to make it to the shower. Sempha helped me prepare for the administrator's visit. I expected him to be one of the large, gruff types I've seen out the window, working in the sorting compound, but he was a quiet black man with a slight lisp. He was most helpful. I've been concerned about paying for my medical care, but he reassured me that there would be no charge. Even better, he will assign a man to lead me into the high country. He says that it is late in this season, but if I can travel in 10 days, we should be able to make it through the flame forest to the cleft before the Tesla trees are fully active. After he left, I sat and talked to Sempha a bit. Her husband died here 3 local months ago in a harvesting accident. Sempha herself had come from Port Romance. Her marriage to Mikkel had been a salvation for her, and she had chosen to stay on here, doing odd jobs rather than go back downriver. I do not blame her. After a massage, I will sleep. Many dreams about my mother recently. 10 days. I will be ready in 10 days. Day 75. Before leaving with Tuck, I went down to the Matrix Patties to say goodbye to Sempha. She said little, but I could see in her eyes that she was sad to see me go. Without premeditation, I blessed her and then kissed her on the forehead. Tuck stood nearby, smiling and bobbing. Then we were off, leading the 2 packbirds. Supervisor Orlandi came to the end of the road and waved as we entered the narrow lane, hacking into the aureate foliage. Domine d'urgence. Day 82. After a week on the trail. What trail? After a week in the trackless yellow rainforest, After a week of exhausting climbing up the ever steeper shoulder of the Pinion Plateau, we emerged this morning onto a rocky outcropping that allowed us a view back across an expanse of jungle toward the beak in the middle sea. The plateau here is almost 3,000 meters above sea level, and the view was impressive. Heavy rain clouds spread out below us to the foot of the Pinion Hills, but through gaps in the white and gray carpet of cloud we caught glimpses of the Cans in its leisurely uncoiling toward Port R. And the sea, chrome yellow swashes of the forest we had struggled through, and a hint of magenta far to the east that Tuck swore was the lower matrix of fiber-plastic fields near Precabo. We continued onward and upward late into the evening. Tuck is obviously worried that we'll be caught in the flame forests when the Tesla trees become active. I struggled to keep up, tugging at the heavily laden bird and saying silent prayers to keep my mind off my aches, pains, and general misgivings. Day 83. Loaded and moving before dawn today. The air smells of smoke and ashes. The change in vegetation here on the plateau is startling. No longer evident are the ubiquitous weirwood and leafy calma. After passing through an intermediate zone of short evergreens and everblues, then after climbing again through dense strands of mutated lodgepole pines and terraspen, we came into the flame forest proper, with its groves of tall Prometheus, trailers of ever-present phoenix, and round stands of amber lambents. Occasionally, we encountered impenetrable breaks of the white fibrous bifurcated bestose plants that Turk picturesquely referred to as looking like da rotting cocks o' some dead giants, what be buried shallow here, dat be sure. My guide has a way with words. It was late afternoon before we saw our first Tesla tree. For half an hour we had been trudging over an ash-covered forest floor, trying not to tread on the tender shoots of phoenix and firewhip gamely pushing through the sooty soil, when suddenly Tuck stopped and pointed. The Tesla tree, still half a kilometer away, stood at least 100 meters tall, half again as high as the tallest Prometheus. Near its crown it bulged with the distinctive onion-shaped dome of its accumulator gall. The radial branches above the gall trailed dozens of nimbus vines, each looking silver and metallic against the clear green and lapis sky. The whole thing made me think of some elegant high Muslim mosque on New Mecca, irreverently garlanded with tinsel. "We got to get de birds and our arses de hell out of here," grunted Tuck. He insisted that we change into flame forest gear right then and there. We spent the rest of the afternoon and evening trudging in our osmosis masks and thick rubber-soled boots, sweating under layers of leathery gamma cloth. Both of the birds acted nervous, their long ears pricking at the slightest sound. Even through my mask I could smell the ozone. It reminded me of electric trains I'd played with as a child on lazy Christmas Day afternoons in Villefranche-sur-Saône. We are camping as close as we can to a bestose break this night. Tuck showed me how to set out the rings of arrestor rods, all the time clucking dire warnings to himself and searching the evening sky for clouds. I planned to sleep well, in spite of everything. Day 84. 0400 hours. Sweet Mother of Christ. For 3 hours we have been caught up in the middle of the end of the world. The explosions started shortly after midnight. Mere lightning crashes at first, and against our better judgment, Tuck and I slid our heads through the tent flap to watch the pyrotechnics. I am used to the Matthew month monsoon storms on Passam, so the first hour of lightning displays did not seem too unusual. Only the sight of distant Tesla trees as an unerring focus of the aerial discharge was a bit unnerving. But soon the forest behemoths were glowing and spitting with their own accumulated energy, and then, just as I was drifting off to sleep despite the continued noise, true Armageddon was unleashed. At least 100 arcs of electricity must have been released into the first 10 seconds of the Tesla tree's opening spasms of violent energy. A Prometheus less than 30 meters from us exploded, dropping flaming brands 50 meters to the forest floor. The arrestor rods glowed, hissed, and deflected arc after arc of blue-white death over and around our small campsite. Tuck screamed something, but no mere human sound was audible over the onslaught of light and noise. A patch of trailing phoenix burst into flame near the tethered birds, and one of the terrified animals, hobbled and blindfolded as it was, broke free and lunged through the circle of glowing arrestor rods. Instantly, half a dozen bolts of lightning from the nearest Tesla arced to the hapless animal. For a mad second, I could have sworn I saw the beast's skeleton glowing through boiling flesh, and then it spasmed high into the air and simply ceased to be. For 3 hours we have watched the end of the world. 2 of the arrestor rods have fallen, but the other 8 continue to function. Tuck and I huddle in the hot cave of our tent, osmosis masks filtering enough cool oxygen out of the superheated, smoky air to allow us to breathe. Only the lack of undergrowth and Tuck's skill in placing our tent away from the other targets and near the sheltering Bestos plants have allowed us to survive. That and the 8 whiskered alloy rods that stand between us and eternity. They seem to be holding up well, I shout to Tuck over the hiss and crackle, crash and split of the storm. They be made to stand the hour, maybe 2, grunts my guide. Any time, maybe sooner, they fuse, we die. I nod and sip at lukewarm water through the slipstream of my osmosis mask. If I survive this night, I shall always thank God for his generosity in allowing me to see this sight. Day 87. Tuck and I emerged from the smoldering northeastern edge of the flame forest at noon yesterday, promptly set up camp by the edge of a small stream, and slept for 18 hours straight, making up for 3 nights of no sleep and 2 grueling days moving without rest through a nightmare of flame and ash. Everywhere we looked as we approached the hogback ridge that marked the terminus of the forest, we could see seed pods and cones burst open with new life for the various fire species that had died in the conflagration of the previous 2 nights. 5 of our arrestor rods still functioned, although neither Tuck nor I was eager to test them another night. Our surviving pack-bird collapsed and died the instant the heavy load was lifted off its back. I awoke this morning at dawn to the sound of running water. I followed the small stream a kilometer to the northeast, following and deepening in its sound until suddenly it dropped from sight. The cleft. I had almost forgotten our destination. This morning, stumbling through the fog, leaping from one wet rock to another, alongside the widening stream, I took a leap to the final boulder, teetered there, regained my balance, and looked straight down above a waterfall that dropped almost 3,000 meters to mist, rock, and the river far below. The cleft was not carved out of the rising plateau, as was the legendary Grand Canyon on old Earth, or World Crack on Hyperion. In spite of its active oceans and seemingly Earth-like continents, Hyperion is tectonically quite dead, more like Mars, Lucius, or Armagast, in its total lack of continental drift. And like Mars and Lucius, Hyperion is afflicted with its deep ice ages, although here the periodicity is spread to 37 million years by the long ellipses of the current absent binary dwarf. The Comlog compares the cleft to the pre-terraformed Mariner Valley on Mars, both being caused by the weakening of crust through periodic freeze and thaw over the eons, followed by the flow of subterranean rivers such as the Cans. Then the massive collapse, running like a long scar through the mountainous wings of the continent Aquila. Tuck joined me as I stood on the edge of the cleft. I was naked, rinsing the ash smell from my traveling clothes and cassock. I splashed cold water over my pale flesh and laughed out loud as the echoes of Tuck's shout came back from the north wall, 2/3 of a kilometer away. Because of the nature of the crust collapse, Tuck and I stood far out on an overhang that hid the south wall below us. Although perilously exposed, we assumed that the rocky cornice, which had defied gravity for millions of years, would last a few more hours as we bathed, relaxed, shouted echoing hellos until we were hoarse and generally acted like children liberated from school. Tuck confessed that he had never penetrated the full width of the flame forest, nor known anyone who had in this season, and announced that, now that the Tesla trees were becoming fully active, he would have at least a 3-month wait until he could return. He did not seem too sorry, and I was glad to have him with me. In the afternoon, we transported my gear in relays, setting up camp near the stream 100 meters back from the cornice and stacking my flow-form boxes of scientific gear for further sorting in the morning. It was cold this evening. After dinner, just before sunset, I pulled on my thermal jacket and walked alone to the rocky ledge southwest of where I had first encountered the cleft. From my vantage point far out over the river, the view was memorable. Mists rose from unseen waterfalls tumbling to the river far below, spray rising in shifting curtains of mist to multiply the setting sun into a dozen violet spheres and twice that many rainbows. I watched as each spectrum was born, rose toward the darkening dome of sky, and died, as the cooling air settled into the cracks and caverns of the plateau, and the warm air rushed skyward, pulling leaves, twigs, and mist upward in a vertical gale. A sound ebbed up out of the cleft, as if the continent itself was calling with the voices of stone giants, gigantic bamboo flutes, church organs the size of palaces. The clear, perfect notes, ranging from the shrillest soprano to the deepest bass. I speculated on wind vectors against the fluted rock walls, on caverns far below venting deep cracks into the motionless crust, and on the illusion of human voices that random harmonics can generate. But in the end I set aside speculation and simply listened as the cleft sang its farewell hymn to the sun. I walked back to our tent, its circle of bioluminescent lantern lights, as the first fusillade of meteor showers burned the skies overhead, and distant explosions from the flame forest ripped along southern and western horizons like cannon fire from some ancient war on pre-Hegra old Earth. Pardon me. Once in the tent, I tried the long-range comm-log bands, but there was nothing but static. I suspected that even if the primitive comstats that served the fiber-plastic plantations were ever to broadcast this far east, anything but the tightest laser of fat line beams would be masked by the mountains and Tesla activity. On Passam, few of us at the monastery wore or carried personal comm-logs, but the datasphere was always there if we needed to tap into it. Here there is no choice. I sit and listen to the last notes from the canyon wind die, watch the skies simultaneously darken and blaze, and smile at the sound of Tuck snoring from his bedroll outside the tent, and I think to myself, if this is exile, so be it. Day 88. Tuck is dead. Murdered. I found his body when I left the tent at sunrise. He had been sleeping outside, no more than 4 meters from me. He had said that he wished to sleep under the stars. The murderers cut his throat while he slept. I heard no cry. I did dream, however, dreams of Semtha ministering to me during my fever, dreams of cool hands touching my neck and chest, touching the crucifix I had worn since childhood. I stood over Tuck's body, staring at the wide, dark circle where his blood had soaked into Hyperion's uncaring soil, and I shivered at the thought that the dream had been more than a dream. That hands had touched me in the night. I confess that I reacted more like a frightened old fool than as a priest. I did administer extreme unction, but then the panic struck me, and I left my poor guide's body, desperately searched through the supplies for a weapon, and took away the machete I had used in the rainforest, and the low-voltage master with which I had planned to hunt small game. Whether I would have used a weapon on a human being, even to save my own life, I do not know. But in my panic, I carried the machete, the master, and the powered binoculars to a high boulder near the cleft, and searched the reason for any signs of the murderers. Nothing stirred, except the tiny arboreals and gossamers we had seen flitting through the trees yesterday. The forest itself seemed abnormally thick and dark. The cleft offered 100 terraces, ledges, and rock balconies to the northeast for entire bands of savages. An army could have hidden there in the crags and ever-present mists. After 30 minutes of fruitless vigilance and foolish cowardice, I returned to the campsite and prepared Tuck's body for burial. It took me well over 2 hours to dig a proper grave in the rocky soil of the plateau. When it was filled and the formal service was finished, I could think of nothing personal to say about the rough, funny little man who had been my guide. "Watch over him, Lord," I said at last, disgusted at my own hypocrisy, sure in my heart that I was mouthing words only to myself. "Give him safe passage. Amen." This evening I have moved my camp over 1/2 kilometer north. My tent is pitched in an open area 10 meters away, but I am wedged with my back against a boulder. Sleeping robes pulled around, the machete and master nearby. After Tuck's funeral, I went through the supplies and boxes of equipment. Nothing had been taken except for the few remaining arrestor rods. Immediately, I wondered if someone had followed us through the flame forests in order to kill Tuck and strand me here, but I could think of no motive for such an elaborate action. Anyone from the plantations could have killed us as we slept in the rainforest, or, better yet, from a murderer's point of view, deep in the flame forests, where no one would wonder at 2 charred corpses. That left the Baikura, my primitive charges. I considered returning through the flame forests without the rods, but soon abandoned the idea. It is probable death to stay, and certain death to go. 3 months before the Teslas become dormant. 120 of these 26-hour local days. An eternity. Dear Christ, why has it come to this? Why has this come to me, and why was I spared last night if I am merely to be offered up this night or next? I sit here in the darkening crag, and I listened to the suddenly ominous moaning rising with the night wind from the cleft, and I pray as the sky lights with the blood-red streaks of meteor trails, mouthing words to myself. My voice is beginning to go, so we're going to have to stop here. Next week, we will be reading day 95. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you to Tent for joining me. It was nice to get to see you again, Matthew. I hope everyone has a lovely week. Good night.